mentioned, my name is Eran. I'm part of the team here at Allison Park. This is where my wife and I are evangelists, and we base out of this church. It's our home church. We love this house. We love partnering with this house, especially in school ministry. And then we also have a missional organization, a nonprofit called Lead the Generation. We do a lot of leadership development for mainly youth pastors, soon also kids pastors. I guess we got to talk about that, Sarah. We're actually adding a whole new thing here. And then I do a lot of leadership and coaching with all kinds of ministry leaders and volunteers, full-time, part-time, and all that. So excited to spend a couple minutes with you in this session. My wife is floating around somewhere. I don't know if she's here. We just celebrated 25 years of being married last year. Let's go. And if 2021 wasn't good enough because we celebrated 25, we welcomed our first granddaughter to the family. So we finally have arrived at grandparent status, and man, that's awesome, right? It's just like we're so good. Let's talk leadership, and we'll jump in here. I'm going to go to John 15. If you want to jump ahead, you can do it. Jesus is kind of having a little bit of a final discussion with his disciples, right? They've just celebrated the Last Supper, and now they're at John 15. And then, if you know your Bible, then you know that John 16, 17, this entire narrative, several chapters of what I like to call Jesus kind of like crash course in leadership for the disciples. He knows the end is coming soon. He knows that ultimately death, burial, resurrection, and then ascension is drawing nigh. His disciples don't yet. So I almost contextually look at that passage and think Jesus is almost like, listen, there's a couple really important things. And it's almost like when your mom said, I'm leaving, you got one job. You ever have your mom say that to you? My wife had this conversation with me years ago. I was coming home from a trip. I'd been hunting with my dad. And she said, you got one job. I'm like, what's that? She's like, you need to stop and pick out the family Christmas tree and bring it home. And so I'm like, awesome, it's a great job. I had done this several times, and now it's, I'm doing it again. And so pick out this awesome tree on the way home. I put it at the top of the truck. We're driving home. I say we because it's me and my dog, my golden retriever, my big dog, right? How many dog lovers? Any dog lovers? Okay. By dog, I mean big dog. Over 50 pounds. If your dog's not over 50 pounds, I'm sorry, that's not a dog. No, like if you can pick your dog up and stick it in a little purse, that's not a dog, that's a football. You should punt it. Okay, sorry. Anyways, we're going home, and I got a tree on the truck, big dog, riding shotgun, halfway home, pull off the side of the highway to drive through. I got one job, and that is to get the Christmas tree home, but getting some food at a drive-thru, and before you get back on the highway, I get distracted from my one job because I saw the sign for a car wash, and so I was like, that's great. I should get the car wash. Completely forgetting. It's like one of those like self-serve ones that like basically there's no attendant there to say, hey, you're an idiot. And so like I just roll up and like I just like. Every button that was available, I hit them all. Like Buddy the Elf in the elevator. Just give it and just wash, wax, extra it. Through the car wash, I'm like loving life, proud of myself, back on the highway. Probably an hour goes by. I'm still driving home. And I'm kind of actually happy. I'm thinking my wife's going to be proud of me. I'm coming home with a clean car from a hunting trip. And I'm just driving, and all of a sudden I'm like, it just kind of hits you. It's like, you ever had that moment where your stupidity reveals itself to yourself. You're like, and I'm like, I'm talking to myself now, and I'm like, and I'm like, no, you're taking some responsibility for this. Like, we just drove the Christmas tree through a car wash. Like, who does that? Like, who has ever put these words together in the same sentence? I drove the Christmas tree through a car wash. I'm now thinking I've ruined Christmas. If there's a tree left, it's a Charlie Brown Christmas tree at this point. I'm thinking of like all my favorite, movies with Christmas trees that are falling apart. I get home and I kind of very quickly get out of the car because I want to see the damage before I have to like own it with my family. And I realized right away, it looks okay. Like you can't really tell, which is surprising. A little wet, a lot of wet, but just, And I look at the dog, I'm like, nobody knows. I ain't telling her. Little paw pound, like here we go. grab that tree, roll in. One job, I got it. I did the one job, put the tree down. The kids are all jumping up and down. My wife's like, it's beautiful. And as she's setting it up, like there's just drips, like a puddle, like a, it's just, she's like, wow, it's like the tree's really wet. And I'm like, yeah. She's like, did it like rain on the way home or something? Because it didn't rain here. Did it rain? And I was like, yeah, we hit some water. And yeah. So like, she's buying it. I'm good. Everything's fine. Like a week goes by. The tree looks great. And I walk through the living room one day, and my wife is over there by the tree, and she's got like one of the tree branches with the pine needles like in the palm of her hand. She's got a little second grade teacher glasses on. She's looking at this thing like Sherlock Holmes or something. I don't know. And I just get nervous. Now at this point, like all the married men in the room, you know that feeling when you know she knows what you did, but you don't think she knows what you did? Yeah. So she says to me, she's like, baby, did you get the same tree as last year? I'm like, yeah. She's like, are you sure? I'm like, positive. She's like, I'm like, why? And she's like, I don't know. There's just something different about the tree. And now I've been married long enough to know that at this point, my best strategy is to try to distract her off my scent and figure out what's going on. Every husband learns these skills after a while. So I say to her, I'm like, well, I don't know, baby. What do you think is different about the tree? She literally says these words to me. It's almost like the pine needles are shiny. At this point, I'm thinking like clear coat wax button. Like I remember like I was super excited about that button for some reason. I don't know. And like so like I'm not telling her. I'm not doing it. So then like now it's like right before Christmas. We're sitting there in the living room. She's living room. She's sitting beside me. I got my arm around her. Soft Christmas music, dim light, tree lit up. The dog's asleep at our feet. It's all great, And she's like, baby, I'm worried about the Christmas tree. And I'm like, baby, it is the best looking tree you have ever decorated. Like you did an amazing job. Husband distraction techniques 101. This is actually leadership 101 for some of you single guys. Yeah. So she's like, no, I'm worried about the tree because I feel like it's drying out too fast. Did you give this tree enough water? At this point, the dog wakes up, looks at me, goes to the other room. He's like, I'm out. I got nothing to do with this, man. I'm like, baby, that tree got so much water. Like I'm thinking like it got so much water. It's absolutely fine. This thing like dries up, dies. The whole bit. And so at this point, like she confronts me because she knows that something's going on. Since a couple of days later, and she was like, "What did you do to my tree?" Like I gotta come clean at this point. I had one job. I failed. I got distracted, and like, but how does one formulate the sentence? I drove right the Christmas tree through a car wash. I always wanted to be known for something no other person had ever done in this world. This was not my idea of what that moment was going to be like. And my wife, on the other hand, just looks at me. She just looks at me like if her face could say anything, it would have said, "I married an idiot." I'm thinking to myself, she's a Christian. She can't quit the team. Like we're good. Like it's all good. Like one job. Don't get distracted. One job. Okay. So here's leadership 101 according to Jesus. There's a lot of things in the Bible you could point to pull leadership principles from. John chapter 15. One job. This is what Jesus says. Let me read the text to you, right? He says, I am the true vine, my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remember the context. They just got done having the Last Supper. Jesus is having a final moment with his disciples. It's almost like final marching orders according to the book of John. Verse 4, remain in me, as I also remain in you. Or in your translation, it might say abide. Everyone say abide. Abide. As I abide in you, no branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain. It must abide in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain, unless you abide. Sounds like Jesus is dropping truth here about one job. Abide, abide, abide. Remain, remain, remain. Verse 5, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, you abide in me, and I in you, then you will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, if you don't abide in me, then you are branches thrown away and wither. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me, I'm not making this up. I mean, this is in here this many times. Verse 7, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, then you can ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. I think Jesus is giving a crash course in leadership. Leadership 101 to the disciples. This is not necessarily profound. This is not necessarily complex. This is not necessarily difficult. It's actually pretty simple to understand, but probably in your life and my life, pretty difficult to follow through on. He just says, remain, abide. I'm going to give you 3 simple leadership principles from this text that I think we can all apply to our life. Some of you will receive these and you'll be like, yep, good reminder, I'm doing all these. Some of you will have 1 or 2 of these that might jump off the page a little bit, so to speak, and the Holy Spirit might highlight those in your heart today and say, that's something you need to chew on. That's something you need to recapture. Some of you might look at all 3 of them and say, this whole leadership thing in the church world has got me all kinds of distracted, all kinds of driving Christmas trees through car washes, right? And I need to kind of recapture some of the baseline understanding of what Jesus is talking about in John chapter 15. Here's principle number 1 for you. Principle number 1, and I kind of use some of my own words for these principles, and then I'll tie them into the text. Number 1 is this. Embrace the monotonous in order to experience the miraculous. Wow. Embrace the monotonous in order to experience the miraculous. So Jesus uses an analogy here of like a grove of trees, so to speak. And he says that he's the vine, or he's the trunk, or he's the root system. That all basically means the same thing in a gardening context. He says that we're the branch, right? Look at your neighbor and just say, you're a branch. You're a good-looking branch. That's what it means. You're just a branch, right? And then ultimately he says, if you remain, if you abide, then you will bear much fruit. And it is to my glory that you bear much fruit. So Jesus is not only saying, hey, here's how you can bear fruit. He's also saying, I want you to bear fruit. It's to my glory that you bear much fruit. But there's this very monotonous process that you and I as leaders, and really ultimately as followers of Christ, that we have to do. It's abiding. It's remaining. It's monotonous. It's same old, same old. It's things in our life that we do the same over and over again. And yes, they're monotonous, but ultimately we want to see the miracle of fruit. If you, number 1, embrace the monotonous, or you have to embrace the monotonous in order to experience the miraculous. When my dad first moved our family to Pittsburgh, I was 9 years old. My dad is a retired Sunday God pastor. He pastored the church for almost 20 years on the north side of Pittsburgh. If you're familiar with the area, you kind of know generally where that's at. The church had a little parsonage. And so I remember, I don't know if it was the first year we were there. In my mind, I think it was. I was pretty young. I think I was 10, 11 years old. My dad went out in the backyard one day and he planted 4 trees in the backyard. 3 apple trees and a peach tree. And I helped him as much as I could as a 10-year-old, which just really means I just distracted him the whole time, and he did all the work. But I was excited because I was like, I love me some peaches, let's go. And my dad planted the trees, and next morning I was wide awake, and I rolled right out to the backyard because I was going to pick myself a fresh peach in order to eat it. And much to my surprise, disappointment, and great frustration, there was no fruit, right? And I went out the next day, and the next day, and the next day. After several days of doing the same thing, right? I remember, like, Dad, like, something's wrong with the trees you planted. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, there's no fruit. Like, there's no peach, there's no apple tree. Now, you, as adults, you all know that you understand this process. It takes some time, right? It takes some time. Sometimes you and I resist the time that it takes for fruit to be produced in our leadership because we don't want to embrace the monotonous. We don't want to do the same old over and over again. And there's, I think same gets a bad rap. There's some same things that you and I need to do, and at the same time, there's also some same things that you probably don't want to do. I'll give you some examples of some bad ones first. This one, I call this one stagnant sameness. Right? This is when in our leadership or in our followership, we just do some of the same things because we just do some of the same things because that's just what we do. I'm just doing me. You do you. I'm just keeping it real. This is who I am. This is the way we do church. This is the way we lead. This is how it is. And it's never produced what we wanted it to produce. but we keep doing it. It's stagnant, right? That's a not good version of sameness. Here's another not good version, stupid sameness, right? That's when you and I, in our leadership or in our followership, we make some of the same stupid mistakes over and over and over and over again. Look at your neighbor and say, he's talking about you right now. But if you're a kid and you touch the stove when it's hot, like you learn the lesson making the stupid mistake the first time, or you should have. But if you're a parent and your kid keeps going back and touching the stove when it's hot over and over again, eventually you're like, there's a problem here. And I think sometimes the Holy Spirit in our life is like, there's a problem here, friend. Why do we continue to make the same mistakes over and over again? That's stupid sameness. Here's another one, stubborn sameness. I'm just doing it the way that I do it. I'm doing it the way that I like to do it. These are my preferences. This is my style, right? Here's another one, scared sameness. That's when we keep doing the same thing. We keep leading the same way because we're just too afraid to change. But here's a great example of sameness that you and I need to embrace. Here's an example of the sameness that can become monotonous in our life, but we really need it. So if you're taking notes, write this down. I call it sacred sameness. Wow. Sacred sameness. Jesus calls it abiding. I just call it sacred sameness. Jesus says, remain, 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 abide, abide, abide. I just say there are some sacred rhythms that need to be a part of my life as a follower of Christ, first and foremost, and then secondly, as a leader. Right? Like we can talk all day long about leadership, but if you haven't figured out followership, forget about leadership. Because ultimately, followership to Christ, first and foremost, is what's going to produce leadership in our life anyways. Yeah. And so there's some sacred sameness. It's like what Jeff talked about in his opening session. It's when I go back to the well, and I keep going back to the well because I know that well always produces. Right? So it's this monotonous process of again and again and again and again. And for me as a junior high boy, it was watching my dad, water the trees again and fertilize the trees again and water again and fertilize again. It's the monotonous that produces the miraculous in your life. How many sports people have here? Got any like NFL football people? Okay, so you might remember this play. This is from many seasons ago. Odell Beckham Jr., wide receiver at the time, he was playing for the New York Giants. Okay, do you remember the catch? You already know. You're the one-handed, I'm going to hold on so I don't die here. Like the one-handed, just stretch back over. And some analysts said this is the greatest catch in all of the NFL, and that very well could be true, right? And then oddly, other analysts, they were like, man, that was a great catch, but then they would be like, what a lucky catch. Like, man, just kind of lucky, to be honest, And so here's what's really interesting. You can go back on YouTube. You can do it today. You can go on YouTube and find that catch. You can also go on YouTube and find Odell Beckham's practice routine that day pre-game and see that he actually was practicing that exact catch over and over and over and over again. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say if you don't embrace the monotonous parts of leadership and followership in your life, you will never experience the miraculous that you so desperately want to experience in the form of fruitfulness in your leadership, in your ministry, in your job, in your family, in every aspect of your life. There's a monotony to this, right? I remember growing up at that little church in Pittsburgh, really small church, didn't have a full band. And for a couple years, we had this drummer that I don't even know if the guy was saved, to be honest. But he would come, he would play drums, and then after worship, my dad would start preaching, and this dude had places to go, and so he would always leave. But when he left, he needed to take his drum set with him. So my dad's up there preaching, and like 6 trips back and forth, this guy just grabbing stuff and walking out, and I just remember what's going on? Well, this doesn't work, obviously. So at some point, I don't know, they said to the guy, yo, this isn't working, so you got to go. Either stay or go, but go. So he left, and so we didn't have a drummer. So the worship leader at our church, he went out and bought, and then this is 30 years ago, I don't know, maybe even more. He bought one of those little drum machines, right? And it's it's got It's got like one beat in it. And that's all it does. And like you can't like program it for like different BPMs for different like the speed of the song. So like in between every song it'd be like boom boom cha boom 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 cha boom boom boom. And he'd have to like it had like one drum fill. I mean it's like the whole thing. So I'm a junior higher and I just remember being like, I'm going to learn how to play drums just so I don't have to listen to that ever again. Never again. And like not long after that, someone donated a drum set to the church. And I started taking drum lessons. Okay? I wanted the fruit right away. And I learned one beat and I went to the worship leader and I'm like, look what I can do. Right? And he just said, keep practicing, keep practicing, keep practicing. Then I got a drum teacher, and he would sit there and he'd be like, all right, I want you to play the same exact beat for me, but you can't change it or alter it or speed it up or slow it down, and you have to play it nonstop for like 5 minutes in a row. And I remember thinking, this is the dumbest thing ever. Like, teach me different grooves, teach me different beats, teach me that, like, teach me that drum fill. Like, what he was trying to help me understand is I needed to learn to embrace the monotonous to see the miraculous. Let me say it to you like this. And this is what even athletes model for us. Not just athletes. Any great leader that you admire, any great communicator that you admire, any great person for any reason that you admire them, for any skill that they have, if you got to know them, they probably would tell you or help you understand that it was what they're doing in private that's producing the results publicly that everyone wants. Right? So I want to say to you like this, and you can write this down. What you do in private produces the public results everyone wants. Or here's another way that you can say it. Everything you want in your future will be developed from faithfulness in your present. Jesus is trying to help his disciples understand this. They don't know. In their minds at this point, they're still thinking Jesus is going to, by force, overthrow the Roman government and they will serve in leadership with him. They don't understand that's not what's going to happen here. You disciples are going to go lead the early church. And I just interpret John 15 as Jesus saying, you've got one job. Abide, stay, remain connected to me. Paraphrase, embrace the monotonous in order to experience the miraculous. All right, let me go on in the text here real quick, and I camped out on number 1 a little bit longer because I wanted to drive that home. So let me give you 2 and 3 here, and we'll end this right on time. Jesus says this, verse 2: He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. I don't know about you, like I'm kind of okay with the idea that you can cut off the dead stuff, because usually the dead stuff is kind of in my way. I don't really want that in my life. But the text says that the dead stuff gets cut off and that the good stuff gets pruned back. I don't know about you. I don't like that. I don't want that. I'm kind of not cool with that. Like I'm not all about God the gardener acting like Edward Scissorhands up in my life, right? I'm not all about like Michael Scott snip snap snip snap snip snap. Some of you missed a really good joke right there. Tim, you got it. I know you got it. I kind of like the idea that God the gardener is walking into the garden and he's looking at me as a branch and he's like, look at you, little branch. You're a good little branch. Look at that little fruit, little branch. Keep on growing, little branch. Keep on going, little branch. You're doing great. And apparently Jesus is like, you're going to get cut back. I'm going to prune you. Or I'm going to allow the circumstances of life to bring about a pruning season in your life. I'm not really okay with that, to be honest. But Jesus says it's an essential part of the whole process of you and I leading well. And in John 15, he says, you're going to get pruned. And how does he say in the text? Because I want to make sure I'm accurate to the text. He says this, every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes. Why? Read the rest of the text. So that it will be even more fruitful. So here's leadership principle number 2. Embrace the cutback as a setup. Embrace the cutback as a setup. Pruning in the physical sense, when you're talking about a plant or a tree, pruning prioritizes. And what pruning does is pruning prioritizes in a tree, it prioritizes nutrients to go to that part of the tree. And when that part of the tree, that branch that has been pruned, receives all the extra nourishment, then it grows back. And when it grows back bigger and stronger, and it can produce even more fruit. I walked out one year in the spring, or I think it was actually in the late season, in the winter, in the fall, and my dad was cutting the branches on the peach tree, and I applauded him because I thought he was cutting the tree down. I'm like, get rid of it. It doesn't even work. He's like, I'm pruning it. I don't know what pruning even means. And yes, he explains his process to me, that the tree's going to have to go through, listen, several seasons of pruning in order for it to reach its full fruit-producing potential. Are you with me?
Yes.
Are you there in your leadership?
Yes.
Are you thinking about your life? Are you thinking about your journey? Are you thinking about your experience? I hope you are. I hope you're thinking about every pruning experience that you've gone through, or the one that you're living in right now. I hope you're thinking about every relationship that didn't end and got cut out of your life. I hope you're thinking about every opportunity that didn't present itself to you that you thought you really needed, and it felt like you were being pruned or you were overlooked. And I hope that you remember that as you embrace the cutback, what you're really doing is you're embracing the cutback as a setup, because pruning prioritizes in your life. You know what pruning also does? Pruning purifies your motives as a leader. Because sometimes as leaders, we can want Jesus to do stuff for us more than we want Jesus.
Oh my goodness. Come on. No.
Like, I don't really, like, if I'm going to be real and just real talk, and I'm going to be transparent as a leader, sometimes I got to own the fact that I don't really want Jesus as much as I want Jesus to do stuff for me or produce stuff through me.
Right.
And so pruning prioritizes, and pruning purifies, right? It purifies my motives, right? And then ultimately the text says that pruning produces, right? It produces fruit. It produces a Christ likeness in me, right? It produces a greater capacity for me to lead and to bear much fruit. So apparently, according to the text, one of Jesus' primary goals in your life as a leader is that you not just be a branch, but you be a branch that every time you get pruned, every time the circumstances of life cut you back, every time a relationship cuts you, or a church member cuts you, or a program that gets canceled because it doesn't work, every time that happens to you, Jesus says, I'm pruning you back, because when you grow back, I want you to be a bigger and stronger branch that can bear the weight of the responsibility of more fruit in your life. That makes me a little bit more open to pruning, but I'm still on the side of, like, if I can avoid it, I'm going to try to avoid it. But Jesus really doesn't give that option, does he?
No.
And actually, maybe he does, because he says if the branches are dead, they get cut off, but that just gets thrown into the fire. So then maybe you and I really need to choose. Am I willing to allow branches that are going dead in my life or my leadership or my ministry to be pruned back before they get completely cut off? Something to think about. Something to pray for. Let me give you one more. I got 50 seconds left. Here's number 3. Embrace reaching as remaining. Embrace reaching as remaining. So let me say to you like this. What good is the faith to step out if you don't have the faithfulness to stick it out? What good is it to have the faith to step out as a leader if you don't have the faithfulness to stick it out? Jesus says, remain, 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 abide, abide, abide. He says, just keep embracing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and you will produce much fruit, and that fruit will be to the glory of God, to the glory of the kingdom of God. He says, it's my will for you to produce much fruit. So it's not enough for us, especially in ministry leadership, it's not enough for us to say, I'm just going to be faithful, that's all that matters. The text says faithfulness, yes, foundational, has to happen. But Jesus says, I want to see you be fruitful. Yeah. Because fruit produces glory for the kingdom of God. Faithfulness precedes fruitfulness. Yes. That probably should really be point number 3. I'm going to rewrite it right now in front of you. It's not embrace reaching as remaining, it's embrace faithfulness as fruitfulness in your life. Or here's the phrase I use for myself. This is what I say to myself when I'm way off my workout routine. The routine is the reward.
Yes.
Like it's January, right? So like a bunch of us are like, man, January 1, I was there, I was in the gym. January 2, 3, I made it, and then I didn't see any results. Because we want reward immediately.
Yes.
And so I've had to shift my thinking and say, no, the routine is the reward.
Yes.
I showed up. I showed up again and again. I asked my grandfather, it was actually my wife's grandfather, I asked my grandfather how he made it through 50 years of marriage, a wife that was bound to a wheelchair for over 30 years of their marriage, who he bathed and cleaned every single day and prepared meals for her early in the morning and then worked his 8-hour shift and then came home and did it all again and woke up in the middle of the night over and over again to take her to the restroom, to physically carry the restroom. All of that for 30 plus years of their marriage before she passed away. And I remember one day, I never met her, but I had many great conversations with him. And one day I said to him, how'd you do it? How did you do it? And in fewer words or less, what he said to me was this. He said, I just kept showing up. I just kept showing up. I just kept showing up. And can I just sow that word into your life as we close this session? Keep showing up. Keep showing up in the garden. Keep showing up in your faithfulness. Keep showing up in your intimacy with Christ. Keep showing up even when the pruning season in your life hurts. Just keep showing up. God, I speak that and declare that over these leaders, the churches, the homes and families they represent, Lord. Holy Spirit, would you enlighten in their heart areas where pruning is happening? Would you enlighten in their heart areas where faithfulness is lacking, Lord? Would you enlighten in their heart, Lord, areas where they've drifted and lost sight of the one job? Would you bring them back to that place of abiding and intimacy with you? In your name I pray. Amen.